Hello, good evening. My name is Carmen Julia and I'm curator at Spike Island. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event with Lucy Stein and Amy Hale, who will be discussing Stein's current exhibition, Wet Room, and their shared interest in Western esoteric traditions, modern paganism, and the goddess culture that thrives in Cornwall. Today's conversation is part of an extended program of events organized around Lucy Stein's exhibition, Wet Room, currently on view in our galleries. Wet Room is inspired by the Fugu, narrow Neolithic underground passages unique to West Cornwall that lead to womb-like chambers, highly valued by the goddess culture that thrives in the region. They have become sacred sites of worship. Echoing the ritual rebirthing ceremonies believed to have taken place within these uterine caverns, the exhibition's central installation comprises a bathtub and a sink with running taps. The rounded tile walls have been hand-painted with underwater scenes related to Stein's study of Western esoteric tradition. Before I introduce our guests tonight, I just want to remind everyone that our public programs seek to create an environment for critical and open-minded discussion. We encourage you to use the chat function available through YouTube Live to write any questions you may have throughout the event. We'll be fielding these around the 45-minute mark, and please note that the live stream and the chat are being recorded. A reminder that any aggressive, discriminatory, or intolerant comments will be removed by our chat moderators, in keeping with our aim to create a respectful and generative environment for all involved. Please see our code of conduct for more information. This event includes live subtitles provided by John Petre from Stage Text. And now, without further delay, it's my great pleasure to introduce this evening's speakers. Lucy Stein is an artist who works primarily with painting. Her work embodies a mixture of styles and references that are loaded with a strong psychological charge. Weaving together personal experience with subjects as diverse as feminist and psychoanalysis theory, mythology, or religion, her work questions the way in which women have been represented in Western art history by introducing a female gaze. Since moving to St. Just, Cornwall in 2015, Stein has been deeply influenced by the history, mythology, and folkloric traditions of the Cornish landscape. Stein studied at the Glasgow School of Art and later at the Ateliers in Amsterdam. Recent solo exhibitions include Thesmophoria at Gallery Gregor Steiger in Milan in 2020, Digitalis Purpurea, a re-introspective at Conceptual Fine Arts in Milan in 2020, £10.66 at Palette Terre, Paris in 2018, Cry in the Neck at Nick, Brussels in 2017, and Onculticity at Rodeo Gallery in London in 2016. Dr. Amy Hale is an Atlanta-based anthropologist and folklorist writing about esoteric history, art, culture, women, and Cornwall in various combinations. Her biography of Ithel Colquhoun, Genius of the Fern-Loved Gully, was published in 2020 and is available from Strange Attractor Press. And she is also the editor of the forthcoming collection, Essays on Women and Western Esotericism, Beyond Seeresses and Sea Priestesses, available from Palgrave Macmillan 2021. Welcome, and thank you for being here this evening. And Amy, I hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Carmen. It is absolutely a pleasure and a delight to be here today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And Lucy, hello, it's so good to see you.
Hello.
Hello, from beautiful Paris.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
A lovely hotel room with the beautiful art on its walls.
So let's just dive into the Wet Room. The first thing that I really want to discuss is the title of the exhibition itself. I find that the Wet Room, it's sexy and it's kind of clinical at the same time. It's so evocative. We think about, you know, women and sexuality, but also this, you know, this kind of this sort of in-between place. And of course that it evokes the Fugu. And as you and I were saying before, you know, there's been the idea of the wet market has also been very lively in the press. So the wet room kind of brings to mind a lot of different things. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about the choice of the name, what it means to you, what you're hoping that it evokes in the viewer.
Well, it's actually just wet room, not the wet room, which I suppose I just wanted it to be very deadpan, direct, quite, as you say, clinical. And it wasn't until you pointed it out that I was reminded about the wet market, and that is another example of the strange gift of precognition that making art gives me. And I think it is quite common for artists to prefigure things in the world that are happening with their work. Because actually I had come up with the title in early 2019, I think, or maybe, well, sometime in 2019. So I guess I had a very young baby and I was pregnant again, which was actually a bit of a surprise, a lot of a surprise. And I had this sense when you're pregnant of percolating, which is very kind of strong and, you know, intense. But I also, and I'd spent so much time in the Fugus, and I knew that I wanted this exhibition, which was a great sort of gift to me, this exhibition. I wanted it to be very much steeped in the research that I'd been doing for the past 5 years or even 10 years, but really based in Cornwall for 5 years. And I wanted it to play on the experience I was having in Cornwall, which is very much this kind of dual experience, that you have this very spiritualized landscape and this culture, but then you also have this tourism and this homogenizing kind of effect that it has on the houses, where everything's painted the same sort of heritage, all the windows are the same heritage green, and you have these very clinical kind of bathrooms because there's families passing through. So many of the houses have that kind of clinical feeling. So that was a bit of a double entendre. Yeah. And then, yeah, the womb, basically. So this site of fecundity, the fecundity of women, but then also this clinical edge.
And can you tell me a bit about, I think it should be on the screen right now for folks to look at. Tell me a bit about the central piece of, maybe it wasn't the central piece to you, but I think it's absolutely mind-blowing, with the tub and the kind of the wet room that is part of the installation of the exhibit. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was really possessed by visiting the holy wells and this idea of water and the divine feminine. And I'd been going to San Creed Well a lot, and I'd done a booth at an art fair, Freeze art fair, and I'd put a bead day in the booth, and it had this kind of trickling water coming out of it, and I was pregnant, and I just felt like it created this kind of very calm, soothing space in this very frantic and quite unpleasant atmosphere. And I thought, wow, this is actually something that really works with my paintings, invoking this kind of like nature, basically, the cavern, invoking this very calm, watery space. But this water has a lot of different significances for me, and it's not always calm and soothing, but when it's trickling like that, it is. And initially I was going to make an entire wet room, so it was going to be 4 walls and you'd have to walk in, and then I was going to fill it with condensation, and it was going to be this full-on experience for people, and you'd have to enter it like you'd enter a fugu in a very kind of ritualized way. And then we decided against it for a number of reasons, and actually I was very happy that it became this sort of set that referenced that, so that you could experience it but still understand it as an artwork and not as a full-on, embodied installation. And the imagery,
do you see the bathroom then, or that kind of space as being a space that we can use for calm and regeneration, maybe in our own homes and spaces?
I think the bathroom really appeals to me, and I've worked with imagery from the bathroom for years, actually, because it's this site. It's the only place in the house where you're really alone with yourself, and you're in your most kind of shameful aspect. Or if other people could see you, you're really vulnerable. So yeah, that's really important to me, that it's this space of very intimate bodily vulnerability. And of course, being pregnant, that you feel that yourself. It's almost like you're that walking vulnerable cave. Yeah, so I just wanted to make a bathroom. I mean, it's my dream, really. Bathrooms and swimming pools have always been my dream to make.
Oh, so you'd like to maybe do tiles for a swimming pool?
I'd love to. Yeah.
Ooh. Oh, that's great. That's really, really interesting. I like that. I like that. So something that Carmen had said in the introduction, and something that we've discussed, is your relationship with what we've called the spiritualized landscape in Cornwall. And I know that you come back to this in a lot of your work. Maybe we can see the picture of you and Nina Royal at Tregasil Circle, which is just such a lovely image. Why is the spiritualized landscape of Cornwall so compelling for you as an artist, and also spiritually?
I mean, I can only answer this extremely personally, which is that I grew up going to Cornwall maybe once or twice a year, because members of my dad's family lived there, and it was always very moving to me because it's so beautiful, and I understood the difference that you experience. There's this kind of like, you cross the Tamar and then you're suddenly in this kind of dream space, and the light's different because there's so much water. But it's more than that. It's also it's also because of a family history which is very tragic, which is that my grandfather committed suicide there. And so when we were there, it was always very emotional. There was always a lot of emotion that was brought up in my family. And I think as a young person, it made a huge impact on me. Maybe the confluence of that, the beauty and an understanding as I got older about the creative heritage, the artistic heritage of the place, which I now understand that the area that I knew well is, really not that connected to the area that I now live in. But it seemed when I moved to the area that I now live in that it was, it takes a long time to really understand a place and realize how different everywhere is, and what a different texture and atmosphere every single place has. But I also think that's the thing that makes Cornwall so exceptional, is that you can go I think the only place I know like it really is London, in that you can go, just like 5 minutes down the road and have a completely different atmosphere. Yeah. But I'd love to hear about your experience of Cornwall, Amy, and how you ended up in Cornwall, and how you feel about it now.
Well, I can certainly say that I miss it every day.
Really?
There's no doubt about that. I love where I am in Atlanta, and it's absolutely I live in a beautiful, beautiful city, but I miss Cornwall. I wish it were so much easier for me to just hop down the road and be there. What you were saying about the thing that happens when you cross the Tamar, and the feeling that you get. I've done it so many times, and of course I lived in Cornwall for many years, and that feeling is always something special. And I think that that's true whether you're visiting, whether you live there, whether you consider yourself to be Cornish or not. There's just something about, I think because you have to cross a very large body of water to get there, that there's something special and kind of initiatory about that experience whenever you do it. I think you're also right that there is something about the landscape has such extremes to it, whether it's cliffs or whether it's moors or you find an incredible valley. It's the variations of the landscape, and I spend a lot of time in the Clay area. My former husband was from the Clay area, and spent a lot of time in the Clay area landscape. And even, walking through that very industrial landscape, and you bend down and you pick up a huge chunk of amethyst, or you turn a corner and there's something that looks like it's a cove that could be out of Hawaii with the bluest, most coppery water and palm trees. And it's just, there are so many surprises being in Cornwall. But I also personally gravitated to the culture and the people and the story of Cornwall, which is something, and the story of the Cornish. And that's always been a really driving force that has kept me going back, is looking at, you know, that journey and what's been going on there culturally, politically over the past 20, 30 years is absolutely remarkable. And it changes all the time. So, you know, of course, right now there are all these protests about the economy and second homes, and it's such a dynamic place to be culturally, in terms of landscape, artistically. It's never been boring. I love it. I love it. I love it. But, you know, and I kind of wanted to ask, because you are in West Cornwall and there are so many incredible landscapes, do you find that you gravitate more toward West Cornwall? And are there any, do you have any particular sites or places in Cornwall that speak to you the most?
Oh my God. I mean, this could go on for days. West
It
Cornwall
could.
is incredible because it's so, I mean, Penwith is so small, really. And, you know, you could just, I'd never, ever get tired of it. And I never stop discovering new places. Every weekend, I feel like we find a new mystical, strange kind of experience, which, I mean, there's 800 sacred sites dotted over that landscape, which is already crazy when you look at the size of it. And each one has a different atmosphere. And to me, that is just such a kind of generative and nourishing way to live my life now at the moment. I feel like it gives me a lot of inspiration, and it just, yeah, this thing that you say in the essay, Fountains of Hecate, it's this idea of a force. It gives you force, and then for me, it's a force that I can then put into my paintings, and it gives me a kind of self-belief that this feeling of force and power is something that's worth trying to kind of give back in a way, or not back, but give on, maybe pass on.
Have you been to, I think it's the Beehive Hut at Carnooney?
At where?
Carnooney?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Been there. Carnooney is a very weird place. I think my favourite, yeah, it's not my favourite Fugu. I love it though, but my favourite Fugu is Bowley Fugu, I think. That's the one that is most mysterious to me. It feels most enchanted.
Tell me about the enchantment of Bowley Fugu, and have you had any really cool experiences there?
Yes, I got past life regressed there over about 4 hours in 2016 by a hypnotist. And it was very, very powerful, and lots of strange images came up. And at one point I was laughing and crying at the same time. This was for a film that I made with Simon Bayliss, who's an artist who lives in West Cornwall as well, called Regression. He got past life regressed in Pendine Fugu, and I went to Bowley, and Pendine, I wouldn't have been happy to do it there, but Bowley was very, very calm. But the interesting thing about it was that I had this kind of reaction to it, and it made me really depressed for about a month afterwards. So I haven't been able to go back, but I know that it's a good place. It was.
So you haven't been able to go back since that experience?
No, but I know that it's a positive place, but I'm just not sure that being past life regressed in it was the best idea. But the film is quite good, quite interesting.
I know that can be quite an intense experience for folks who have been through it. So yeah, when fugus are very interesting in the sense, you know, something that we've talked about is the way that they are interpreted as these kind of womb-like spaces. And obviously there are a lot of different ways that people interpret fugus. Some think that they were ritual spaces primarily, and that they were connected to matrifocal or matriarchal religions, and so that they were sites for rebirth. Others think that they were grain stores,
yeah,
or places for emergency shelter. So you've got all of these very different readings of them, but today, of course, they're still very commonly used for ritual sites. But you and I have discussed in the past that there's a tendency to want to read these essentialized feminine forms in the landscape, yet this can also be a challenge. Do we want to project these essentialized feminine forms in the landscape? What does it mean to do that? Yet it's still something that's very inspirational to people. And I think that Fugus are maybe almost in Cornwall some of the best examples of this tendency. So I wonder if you had any thoughts about that and how that works, and also how you deal with that in your own work, because you deal with goddesses so much.
I think it's a problem. It's a twofold problem. Firstly, I think the tendency to want to project into the landscape and the idea of Cornwall and the Celtic, or West Cornwall particularly, in the Celtic, this fantasy is so nourishing and supporting to people, and people move down there, and I feel like in a way I moved down there for that reason. But it is fantasy, and I think that's what's really interesting about it, that people are prepared to kind of give over their life to that, and then it becomes part of the economy. And that, as you've written about extensively, that can be kind of problematic to the people who are not interested in that and actually living in a very deprived area of England, and doesn't come into it at all. And secondly, the problem of gender essentializing is something that I think is really interesting and very difficult. And I think in this exhibition, my personal circumstances, being pregnant, having a small child, it was very useful for me at this point to hold on to this imagery and to try and take that force, like I say, from the landscape, and kind of really be aware of the power of nature and the way that it can work on the body, and sort of apply this in a way. It's something, it's more like the warrior feminine than the divine feminine, I would say, is what was coming out in this exhibition. But I do now feel as though I have to draw a bit of a line under that because I'm more aware of the essentializing and what it is to feel these images. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel that then that this was something that was kind of a, even though you've explored this quite a bit in your work, do you feel that because of your pregnancy that it was kind of a bounded project for you? Do you feel that you're kind of working, do you feel like this is something that you may not want to revisit, or do you think that you'll be incorporating it in maybe a different way into your work?
Yeah, I think I'll always visit it, but I think that it will change after this. I feel like this exhibition is really the culmination of a lot of research and a lot of thinking about the notion of fertility, but it was applied very much, in my life and in my work in this one direction that was very much about the body. And I think for me, the wider notion of fertility and what it means in culture and as an artist is more interesting now. And I think there's a problem in Cornwall a bit that the culture needs updating. I think it's still quite kind of settled in this confluence of second wave feminism and hippieism, which is very powerful, and there's a lot of really interesting imagery, but I think that it's quite exclusionary in some ways, and I think it needs updating, and I feel like I've sort of taken what I need from it, but I feel like what I've ended up with is information that can kind of be rearranged in an interesting way somehow, can kind of move forward with it in a way that feels more suitable to the world as it is at the moment, and to where I am in my life. But this notion of fertility, I would say it's about the fecundity of women, and then the wider notion of fertility, which is really important because I think it's a way of dealing with the problems that you face generally as an artist and a person in the world, of feeling very sort of oppressed oppressed by the mediocrity of everything. Not everything, but culture. So fertility is for me, ideas of fertility and enchantment are really important because they're words that act as kind of signs for making your life and also your work, and what your work can open up. Create space for other things and for other ways of life that don't fit into the model that is kind of being fed to us. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, Cornwall has a history of being a site where those things occur for people in general. It's kind of, and I think part of it's the tourist industry, but certainly not exclusively, because a lot of that has to do with how Cornwall is perceived as a place of cultural difference and of Celtic difference. So it's kind of it's got its kind of own sort of engine of enchantment, I think, that happens around Cornwall in any case. But the past couple of years, I think, have been pretty hard. I think we've all had to kind of drag ourselves through and continuously find ways to keep going, to keep inspired, to keep feeling enchanted under sometimes the most challenging of circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me that your book on Ithel Cahoon came out and has had around this time and has had such a huge impact on people. I mean, people have really, I see it whenever I'm teaching or talking to students, and it's such a, it's that book. I feel it's that book that you see on every student's desk, or that people are talking about, and something about that difference. And I suppose she's somebody who really tapped into the landscape to create space for other ways of being, exactly what I'm talking about. I'd love to hear more about how you feel about the reception of your book now and what it means to you, and what you take from that, the fact that this is happening now and it wasn't maybe 10 years ago. It's interesting.
I have to say it's been beyond anything that I would have imagined. If this book had come out, I think 10 years ago, it wouldn't have had the same reception. I think there is a current, there's interest in women surrealists, there's interest in esoteric art, there's interest in women occultists, and she was such a remarkable person. She had such a great mind, and she was so engaged, and we know what she was interested in and how she did her work. And I think that being able for people to be able to see that at this point in history, we don't really have a record of a surrealist or a woman occultist quite like we have in Ithel Colquhoun. And there's just like, we've hit a nerve in terms of what her work does, and it's not just her art though, it's her writing and her essays and her brain. And because a lot of people in Cornwall in particular, when a lot of her artwork was not available, people so resonated with The Livingstones as a book.
Incredible.
Yeah, she was so early in terms of writing about not just the magical potential of landscape, but of having a personal response to it. of having a personal and magical response to it. She also wrote about a lot of interesting and quirky things about Cornwall that, if you live there, like, about the Cornish Gorseth, but a lot of people outside Cornwall would not have known what that was, or any of the stories of kind of magic and folklore that she put into that text, of William Paynter's work with Cornish witchcraft. People didn't know about that. And she kind of laid out this vision of magical Cornwall and said it's okay to have a personal response to this. And I think she was really ahead of her time, because, we see countercultural pilgrimages going into Cornwall after that, after the 1950s and the 60s at a much larger scale. But she really laid the groundwork, and people are now rediscovering her contribution to that. And it's making all the difference. And yeah, it's blowing my mind. I can't believe it. It's making me so happy. It's making me happy for her and her spirit.
No, absolutely. I mean, it had a huge impact on me reading that book when I arrived. I hadn't read it until I arrived, but it also resonated with a lot of stories that my grandmother had told me as a child. So for me, it was hugely mind-blowing, because she even wrote about Harlyn House, which is a house down near Padstow, which is, which my family know well. And my grandmother had seen a ghost there, and she was always telling me about it. And then Ethel has this little bit about Harlyn House and its haunting. And she writes about May Day in Padstow, which is something that I've been going to since I was a child. So it was really incredible, and it has exactly had that effect on me. It gave me confidence to be able to utilize this part of my life that was already very important, but I hadn't quite kind of managed to coalesce all of this stuff into the work. Yeah, and reading that, it just set me off, basically. It was during a residency with Tate St Ives, and I had the opportunity to make a performance event, and it was very influenced by that, and trying to activate different sites around St Ives and the island. And really, yeah, it was a procession, and then it ended in this very kind of heavy but very beautiful and cathartic atmosphere. So it really, yeah, that book changed my life.
Really? Did you use any kind of automatic or intuitive techniques when you were relating with particular sites in that respect?
Well, I was already doing a lot of automatic drawing, improvising with a band to create paintings called Death Shanties, and we played in the studio that I had. And actually, I realised recently that these paintings from the Spike show are sort of the culmination of that process, because I would draw on lots of acetates and mix it up with collage elements, and then create these live paintings that were very quick and lots of different layers, and lots of using transfers and painting, and then painting over the painting, and even cracking an egg on it as the ultimate move. And I always thought I'd make paintings out of them, but I never really did it in any clear way. And then this body of work that I made for this Spike show is actually doing it without even realizing, which is often the way in an art practice. I think you come back, it's very cyclical. You come back to things without realizing you're coming back to them. So lots of automatism, but I wasn't really thinking of it in that way.
Interesting.
And then when I started to make these paintings for Spike, I was doing this course in psychoanalysis, which really, the language just reminded me of this process that I'd been working with, but hadn't really named. Basically, the language named it for me, and then and then I named it back to the painting language. So using transference and projection and all of these things, and then just trying to be very literal. So literalizing those processes. So that some of the paintings in the show are particularly indebted to that, splitting and projection being the most obvious one, but also Jung in PZ, and that relates directly to the fact that Jung actually gave seminars in Pols F, which I found out recently, which is just crazy. So I was thinking about Penzance, because Penzance is really my imaginary. For some reason, Penzance more than St Just, where I live, it holds everything for me as the site of my imaginary, basically, because it's such an interesting place. It has the Trenier estate, which is the most deprived part of Europe, apparently, and then it has the ley line, the Mary line, going directly through it and out towards the Scillies, and then it has the Egyptian house, which, you know, just this crazy building made in the 17th century that is so out there and so occulty in a very kind of organized, systematized way that I imagine Ithel would have loved. That's the funny thing about Ithel, is that she practiced, what I love about her is that she did both, didn't she? She had the very organized, systematized occult approach, which always seems to me very kind of masculine and phallic, but then she also has the kind of eruption, circuitous, wet, fecund, opening up and not trying to corral approach, which is what I've taken from her.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And in her own mind, she married the two, you know, they were part and parcel of this one way that she saw the world. And, you know, she married the two of them so well. You know, I'm now only learning through some of her unpublished essays and some of her other early published essays about some of the way in which she did meditation and kind of altered states of consciousness using symbols and imagery. And she really had a way of looking, a way of seeing. Something that I wanted to pick up on, though, I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to talk about this a bit. You know, you mentioned the Mary line and the Trenier estate, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your pilgrimage with Sarah Harnett, the Mary line, and the way that this project fed back into this particular exhibit. You know, maybe we can look at the Cairngallivor piece, because Cairngallivor, I don't know much about it, but I know that it's a Bronze Age site, but it's also adjacent to a mine, and it's near Zenner, and it kind of has that tension that we've talked about, where there's this, you know, kind of the what people want to think of as the spiritual pre-industrial Cornwall, but when you focus on that, to what degree does it wipe out these other stories? You know, what are we not seeing? And so I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about that pilgrimage, the work that you've done. I love reading your accounts of that because they're so real. They're not, you don't gloss over the challenges of doing those kinds of pilgrimages, especially with a child, but we'll get back onto that in a minute. So yeah, tell me a bit about that work that you and Sarah have done and will continue to be doing.
Well, we met on Instagram, actually, but we had friends in common, and we did a show together, I think in 2009, early 2019, and she actually made this beautiful fountain piece, and it was in a crypt in South London, and it did that thing where it just opened up this new space in an urban art set. I mean, it was actually in a church, so it already was lending itself to that, but it was like she created a Celtic grotto in South London. And I don't know how it came to me, but I think it might have been in a dream. But I just thought, we've got to go on the Mary line, because I just was starting to know about it, and I knew about the Michael line, and I knew about the Michael Mary line, but I didn't know that I hadn't thought that the Mary could be kind of taken out and dealt with on her own terms. And the Michael Mary line, you know, two ley lines that cross the country from Land's End to Norfolk, so southern England, and people are really possessed by the idea of it. And Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst had doused it, and I'd read a lot around it, and I'd realised that my studio was very close to it, and I realised that I was having a lot of experiences with it without even knowing. So I'd become really obsessed with Boscawen and Stone Circle when I moved to Cornwall, and I just felt like this was somewhere that was really giving me everything I needed in order to make work and be calm. So I'd spend a lot of time there. So yeah, we started journeying, and the funny thing is, it happened before we made the plans, before the pandemic, and I think people thought we were mad because we were planning to do it for 2 years because I was pregnant and I knew that everything was going to take me 2 years. But of course, we're not going to manage it in 2 years because of the pandemic. So we started in 2019 in November, and we started at Cornwall Bowl, which is just next to Land's End, which is just a very, very powerful site, clifftop site. And for me, the work I was telling you about in St Ives before is also set up high, and a lot of paintings I've done in the past, and a lot of events that I've done, or a few events, are set where possible on cliffs, because of the story that I told you before about my grandfather, because my grandfather jumped off a cliff and he used to paint a lot of pictures of cliffs, which we all have, all the family members have them, in Pounding Sea. And I was reading Simon Critchley on suicide, and I'm fascinated by the theatricality of that act, and the kind of Wagnerian feeling of taking your own life in that way. And for me, a lot of it for me is reenacting trauma, basically, or reenacting ideas of like perceived trauma, because these things pass down through families and they cause all sorts of atmospheres. And I suppose when you're kind of growing up in it, it became a kind of it was an obsession for me to try and understand those feelings. And somehow this pilgrimage for us has been about reenactment. A lot of the different sites have kind of brought up trauma or issues, and we try and work through it. So it's very kind of emotional, and we use psychoanalytic theory, and we talk in therapeutic terms, but it's also very generative, and we make work and we draw tarot wherever we go, and we follow our dreams, and it's never straightforward. It's always very circuitous, and we always end up coming back to the same places. And it's amazing. So much comes out of it, and the paintings were so informed by that. And particularly, I used to be quite kind of on the side of the dark and eerie, but when you're pregnant, you kind of don't want to do that. You want to just get through to this. You want to still be possessed by the things you're possessed by, but take it through to a space that is actually healing and beneficent. So it's a personal, emotional project, but it feeds back into our work.
It sounds like it's remarkably intuitive, really very powerful. You have a very the work that I've seen that has come out of this, again, has been it's kind of echoed what I think and what I've kind of called your own sort of punk rock sensibility to a lot of these issues of landscape and spirituality. So you're doing a very deep read of them, yet at the same time, you're not romanticizing them. You go to difficult places. You try to bring up those difficult issues. You don't sugarcoat what you're doing.
I mean, I'm very old-fashioned in the way about painting. I think it has to have. I can't really bear things that are too vanilla. I want to have a reaction to things. I want to feel something, even if it's disgust. I make a lot of work that I think is hideous, or I have made a lot of work. And it's difficult to look at, but I like it like that because it makes me feel something. But it's, it's hard on Instagram. It doesn't always translate. It doesn't have that kind of thing that some of it does, but we live in a world now where there's such massive kind of need, financial and in many different ways, to kind of be vanilla in some ways, and for me that's very difficult. I feel like I grew up in a climate of just constantly talking about trauma, death, pain, angst. So it's not really possible for me to make things that are not difficult.
So I know that we've kind of gone out of order just a little bit in terms of what we were thinking we were going to do, and we're going to take questions here in a minute. But maybe this would be a good time to show a piece that really resonated with me, which was The Corn Goddess Goes Back on Instagram.
Yes.
I love that piece so much. It is it's calming, it's contemporary, it speaks to, for me, you know, the kind of maybe our own spiritualized selves, or maybe the fact that the gods also are kind of sometimes just needing to chill out. And you know, I'd love to know a little bit more about what this means to you, but then I know we have questions to go to.
Okay, well, it's full of symbols, and that's not usually the case in my work, but I can read it and I can remember exactly what I was thinking at the time. It's got the corn dollies in it, and I love the way that they're painted. I think that's a pretty delightful bit of painting for me. You know, it's pretty. It's not vanilla, but it's pretty, and I love that. I was thinking, it was a joke, basically. It was a joke because I need things that pull. I can't just be in the fantasy world. I need things that pull me back into the reality of living in the 21st century and all its complexity. So it was sort of a moment of a reflexive moment, and it was, you know, invoking and using a lot of the imagery of the corn dollies and the horseshoes and the black cat and the domestic scene, which, you know, it was interesting to me that I was painting a domestic scene, but of course we'd all been at home for a year, so it would have been weird not to, in a way. But yeah, it's almost like all of that stuff had been expunged, and here we can just kind of be calm and accept the moment that we're in, and the puppets, and there's a cursed puppet, and it's kind of a joke about the fact that this woman, you know, incites and inspires jealousy, of course. So she's green and the puppet in front of her is being stabbed, but she's also not that worked up. She's all right. She's coping.
Because Instagram, I suppose, can do that, can't it?
Mm.
You know, Instagram, I actually find Instagram really nice.
Mm.
I've met a lot of great people on there, and it's I think it's a lot less toxic than, say, Facebook, but I know it can definitely inspire the greenness.
I do worry about my daughters. I did think about it a lot. It was my major worry for some, you know, I got fixated on it when I got pregnant and knew I was having a girl. So it's on my mind a lot.
Yeah, I could definitely see why. So do we have any questions that we want to respond to? I didn't know. Carmen, do we have questions?
Yeah, I'm back.
Otherwise, we can keep going. We're good.
Thank you. I mean, I have one question, since you've been talking about the Corn Goddess Goes Back on Instagram. And it's a question about humor in your practice, or in your painting project, Lucy, because you talk a lot about humor and about the works being very witty, and you know, I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that, because I remember when we were installing here, you know, we kept going back to, you know, like some of the paintings, and just thinking, you know, there is an energy there that makes you laugh sometimes.
I think it is important to me not to be too, I think with angst, in the 21st century, with angst, there has to be humor, because, you know, it's not the 50s, and, or maybe for me, there has to be humor. It's a device, but it's also just a way of being in the world, isn't it? And it draws you out of of yourself, and making paintings can be very kind of theatrical for me and performative, and I think it probably is for to some degree to most people making paintings nowadays. And in a way, that kind of reflexive mode, the humour is the reflexive mode. Not, yeah. I think Marlene Dumas was quite influential on me in that way. I think you just, you take your art very seriously, but you also shouldn't take yourself too seriously. It's just, but it's also very kind of British, I think, to be like that.
Okay, we do have a question from I don't know if I'm going to pronounce these correctly, Nietzsche or Nisi. He says, they say, I wonder when at the start you mentioned these occult state or even views on Cornwall or gender needing updating. How do you think the outlook could be updated?
I mean, I think it's happening. There's so many younger people moving down. I think that the older community can be quite possessive over the culture in a way, but I think it's already happening. There's younger artists. I think the outlook is that people feed their personal experience into this fantasy / reality situation, and then see, it's very generative, it's very fertile. There's a lot of, it really can be an imaginary for everybody who wants it to be, and to have different voices, more people of colour. There's more queer artists moving down to Cornwall at the moment, I think, and there's more kind of discussion of queer paganisms, I believe, younger people, different voices, and then the outcome will be amazing. I mean, it's an amazing gift to have this kind of history and this texture that is kind of at odds with a lot of the more boring side of contemporary life. It's very, very atmospheric, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, great. We don't have any more questions. Well, it's Nicolette actually who was asking. She says she agrees. So great. There's no more questions in the chat right now, but I wonder if you, Amy, want to continue with any questions? Do you have anything?
Well, there are a couple things that we didn't get to, so we can get to those now. I also just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that there are some interesting native Cornish queer voices and queer artists that are emerging in Cornwall. And I know there's also Cornish Pride. And so there are, I think there's a lot more general visibility than certainly when I lived there. And it's nice to see the way in which it's getting a lot more textured in that regard too. So I think that's been really cool for me to see at a distance, to see that kind of emerging also from certain aspects of the native Cornish, from the native Cornish angle. I think that's kind of cool. But one thing I wanted to kind of get back to with Lucy is, and I wonder if we could show, just because I took so much joy in the image of your daughter crawling through the Menontoul. And I shared that with a couple people yesterday and said, this is how I feel. I feel like I've got my head just through the Menontoul, but I need a little boost.
I think it's such a powerful experience going through the Menontoul, isn't it? And just to see somebody going through it, it really creates this sense that you are rebirthed and refreshed to handle whatever is coming your way.
It was so cute to me though, because it looked like she just kind of was, okay, I'm stopping now. And she's just so That picture's so adorable. But we talked a bit, and you've brought it up a bit on your journey on the Mary pilgrimage, and talking about motherhood and the challenges of motherhood, and you've kind of returned to that as, I think, the thing that seems to be underlying a lot of this show.
Yeah. I mean, there's no two ways around it. It's just so, devouring, being pregnant, also being a mother to a very young toddler. And you just have to sort of galvanize every single kind of bit of energy that you have. And then, but also, I've also had this huge creative kind of urge. And so I felt incredibly powerful, really.
You also talk about COVID-19 having a huge impact on at that time in which you were just taking care of the children all the time, and not being able to do as much as you have wanted, really.
I mean, I didn't get back into the studio after having the baby for about 6 months, but I'm also really grateful for that time. I was very lucky in COVID because it completely happened at the same time as having the baby. So it was very kind of, it worked for me the way that everything happened, but it also was very anxiety ridden, as it was for everybody, and quite tragic, but also magical to be in Cornwall, which was very untouched for a long time. So you felt very lucky to be there, and also it was so empty. So all of that landscape power it was really accessible, and it was very beautiful and strange. And then we
have a couple of questions. I can just read them out for you. One is from Lucy Stein, and she says, I'm really interested in the feminist considerations of water in your work, please, Lucy, given that historically women's bodies have been deemed as both leaking vessels and as formless flows.
Yeah, wow. Leaking vessels, formless flow. Yeah. Well, in a way, the fact that the taps never stop flowing, so there is something about the formlessness that is really important. That sound, and that the invocation of that formlessness is really important. It's a really important aspect of the work, and it feeds, or it contributes to the way that I see painting more generally, which is that it has to expand somehow. It has to expand, obviously, beyond the perimeters of the canvas. It has to expand in the same way that I'm talking about atmosphere in Cornwall. This sense of life and expansion, and it almost feels kind of sacred to me. So the water adds to that, contributes to this kind of very holistic, but also quite expansive. It's the only word that seems to really work for me right now. But formless. I mean, I guess the octopus figure, there's an octopus figure, female octopus figure, that was kind of speaking about that formlessness and shape-shifting and fluidity and all of these things that matter so much to Sarah and I in our pilgrimage. And this is a kind of defining feature of the divine feminine, which doesn't have to just be embodied by females, but this being very loose and untamed and loving.
We got another question here from Blythe Thea. Would you say you have a connection to ecofeminism, or consider that limiting?
I don't think I know enough about it, to be honest, but I don't know enough about it to consider it limiting, but it is something that I'm going to be researching a lot more for an upcoming show in Exeter, so I'll be better placed to talk about that in 6 months. I don't spend that much time. I don't really know very much about it, to be honest, as a broad term.
There's another one here from Shan, talking about paganism and the occult. What would be your go-to site to visit in Cornwall if you have never been?
I think Amy should answer that one first.
Amy, maybe that's for you.
Oh man.
Gives me time.
You know, it so depends on your flavor and what day of the week it is, right? So I'm not going to say one, I'm going to say a few because there are so many great ones. I love Madron Well. It's very squishy, but I love it. I love the Menontoll. I think the Scalanoon is an amazing stone circle with the pillar in the middle. It's fantastic. I love Menacuttle Well in Nostell and Roach Rock. Actually, if you want something crazy.
Too many.
I love Roach Rock. If you want something really different, it's actually a medieval hermitage in the Clay area, and it's outstanding. And it's freaky.
In there.
Oh, check out Roach Rock. Wear a jumper.
I think we're just getting near the end of these, but there's one more question I would like to take from
Can
Ben.
I say Bus Cowanoon? That's my
All right.
Bus
Okay.
I'll put you there, Clement. Do you remember?
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. Yeah, really good one. So there's another question from Ben Dosage, and it says, do you have any rituals that you perform before painting or creating works?
No, painting is the ritual. Painting is the ritual.
Painting is a ritual.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah. So I guess we just have to leave it there, really. Thank you, Lucy and Amy, for joining us tonight. It's been really great to listen to you talking about all these landscape and connections to the mystical and Lucy's paintings. So thank you.
Thank you for having us. This has been a really great time. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you, Amy. You're so wonderful.
Thank you, Lucy.
I would also like to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and thank you to my colleagues Olivia Jones, Emily Southcott, and Rosa Tyhus for making this event possible. And I reminded that you can visit Lucy Stein's exhibition in our galleries until January the 16th. So please check our website for opening times. And also just have a look at our website for more upcoming online events. We have a great conversation between filmmaker Peggy Auer, whose work is currently on show here at the Spike Island, and film scholar Erica Baltzum, coming up on November the 18th. So you can book through our website. And we look forward to seeing you soon again. Thanks, everyone.